In the 1970s, Asia was a magnet for a generation of young Westerners. They sought spiritual enlightenment, adventure, and freedom on what became known as the Hippie Trail. But hidden in the shadows of this trail of dreams, a predator was lurking. A man as charming as he was deadly, who turned the search for freedom into a private cemetery. He was known as the Bikini Killer. The press nicknamed him the Serpent for his almost supernatural ability to escape justice. This is Charles Sobhraj, a master of manipulation, a thief, and a serial killer. Charles Sobhraj's story begins on April 6, 1944, in Saigon, Vietnam. The son of an Indian businessman and a Vietnamese shop assistant, his life was marked by instability from the start. His parents separated, and his mother became involved with a French army lieutenant. The family moved between Indochina and France. Sobhraj grew up feeling displaced, stateless, torn between his Asian heritage and his new French identity. This feeling of alienation planted the seeds of deep resentment. His criminal career began early, with petty theft in Paris. In prison, he was not rehabilitated. He perfected his skills. He devoured books on psychology and law, learning the art of manipulation. Using his charisma to deceive guards and prisoners, he met Chantal Compagnon, a young Parisian woman. They married and had a daughter. But in 1970, to escape criminal charges in France, Sobhraj fled with his new family to Asia using false documents. They traveled through the Middle East and Eastern Europe, funding a lavish lifestyle with scams and robberies in India. After being arrested for a failed robbery, he faked appendicitis and escaped from the hospital. The legend of the Serpent was beginning to form. Sobhraj's true hunting ground was Thailand in the mid-1970s. Bangkok was the epicenter of the Hippie Trail, a constant flow of naive travelers, many carrying cash and valuable passports. It was here that he reinvented himself as a lane gautier, a sophisticated gem dealer. And he was not alone. He had accomplices. The main one was Marie-Andrée, a Canadian nurse who fell hopelessly in love with him, becoming his devoted accomplice, often posing as his wife, Monique. There was also Ajay Chowdhury, a young Indian man who became his right-hand man, the muscle for the more violent crimes. The method was terrifyingly effective. Sobhraj and his accomplices would identify their targets. Elaine would use his charm and fluency in multiple languages to strike up a conversation. He would then create a problem that only he could solve. Often, he would poison the victim's food or drink to induce severe symptoms, like dysentery. When the traveler was sick and vulnerable, Sobhraj and Monique would appear as saviors. They would take the victim to their apartment at Cannon House, promising to care for them. Once isolated, the victims were kept drugged, subjugated. Sobhraj would steal their money, travelers' checks, and, most importantly, their passports. The murders seemed to have begun as a way to silence witnesses. The victims were drowned, strangled, or, in some cases, burned alive. With a new passport, the Serpent would assume a new identity and disappear, becoming a ghost to the authorities. The bodies began to appear, but the police were lost. It took the tireless effort of one man to connect the dots: Herman Knippenberg, a Dutch diplomat in Thailand. Knippenberg began investigating the disappearance of the Dutch tourists, ignoring bureaucracy and risking his own career. He dove into Bangkok's underworld. He discovered the victims had last been seen with a gem dealer named Elaine Gautier. Meticulously, Knippenberg connected the murders, the stolen passports, and the false identities, exposing Sobhraj's deadly network. Knippenberg's investigation led to a tireless warrant, but Sobhraj had already fled. He and his accomplices went to India. In New Delhi, in 1976, his reign of terror was paused. While trying to drug a group of French students, the plan went wrong. The students realized what was happening, overpowered Sobhraj, and called the police. Charles Sobhraj was sentenced to 12 years in prison in India. Marie-Andrée was also in prison. She was later diagnosed with cancer. released on compassionate grounds, and died in Canada in 1984, proclaiming her innocence until the end. For Sobhraj, the Indian prison was a safe haven. He knew that as soon as his sentence ended, he would be extradited to Thailand, where he would face almost certain execution for the murders. The tireless warrant would expire in 20 years. In 1986, with his sentence almost over, Sobhraj executed his most famous escape. He threw a large birthday party in Terror Prison, drugging all the guards and prisoners with sweets and grapes laced with sleeping pills. He simply took the keys and walked out the front door. Weeks later, he was recaptured in Goa, almost as if he wanted to be caught. The motive was clear. The escape earned him another 10 years in an Indian prison. When Charles Sobhraj was finally released in 1997, the tireless warrant had expired. He was free. After his release, Sobhraj moved to Paris. He embraced his notoriety, living as a celebrity. He sold his life story rights for millions and gave paid interviews, reveling in the attention. It seemed the Serpent had won the game. Then, in 2003, in an act of hubris that baffles experts to this day, Charles Sobhraj flew to Kathmandu, Nepal. It was the one country in the world where he was still a wanted man. The Nepalese authorities had never forgotten the 1975 murders of the tourists Connie Joe Bronze and Mark Cariri. A journalist with a long memory spotted him in a casino and published the story. Days later, the Serpent was arrested, despite the decades that had passed and the lack of direct forensic evidence. The prosecution used the meticulous evidence collected by Herman Knippenberg in the 70s. Charles Sobhraj was tried and sentenced to life in prison. The charismatic predator who haunted the Hippie Trail was finally caged, not for his most notorious crimes in Thailand, but for a nearly forgotten murder in Nepal, to which he returned out of pure arrogance. Charles Sobhraj, the Serpent, remains a dark symbol of how evil can hide behind a charming face, deceiving everyone in its path, until his own ego led to his downfall.